Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and welcome to episode 2 of Sniper Sundays, a video series where I'll be using anything from DMRs to bolt-action sniper rifles, and just kind of going over some information in relation to the item similar to a weapon review. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So jumping right into the weapon we'll be using today and going over, it is actually the Ace 53 SV. It's very similar to the other weapons in the DMR category, and it does perform pretty similar to a lot of them. You'll probably notice throughout this entire series that a lot of the weapons play pretty familiar with each other, and they do have similar statistics, especially in that of Cord. But let's jump right into the first category. So the weapon does perform at 260 rounds per minute, which is actually pretty equivalent to a lot of the other ones. You usually don't see too high, but overall it's definitely sufficient. Now, of course, clocking in at 560 meters a second, so it's definitely going to be about the third best when it comes to bullet travel time, so you don't have to lead your target as much as some of the other ones, but by all means, it's definitely no bolt-action sniper rifle. The overall damage of this particular weapon is going to be 45 damage up until 15 meters. Now, of course, once you start hitting around 80 meters, the weapon is going to drop off to 38 damage. So that basically ensures to you that the weapon is always going to be about a 3-shot kill. Now, if you do acquire a headshot, that will drop it down to 2 hits, but by all means, trying to go for the headshot is going to be the hardest thing you're going to try to accomplish, as well as the most rewarding. So definitely preparing yourself for the upcoming battle with the opposition is going to be very important, and trying to get it in a strategic position or some cover is going to lead to your success in most cases. This particular weapon does have a 25 round magazine, but if you do count the 1 bullet in the chamber, that does bring it up to 26 rounds, which is actually pretty sufficient for a DMR. I think that places it at the highest amount that could be currently in the DMR category when it comes to magazine size, and that's definitely very efficient, especially when it comes down to killing multiple enemies or trying to at least put down some covering fire for your teammates to push up maybe to an objective. Now, in relation to the reload speeds, if you do have 1 bullet left in the chamber, that's going to make your reload speed at 2.2 seconds, which is a little up there, but it's not too bad in comparison to the other DMRs. Now, of course, if you do happen to expel all of your ammunition, that's going to leave you at 3.2 seconds of a reload animation, which is actually very high. Now, of course, there are similar things in the game that are equivalent to that when it comes to the other DMRs, but overall, 3.2 seconds does take you out of the action and does leave you very vulnerable, but in this particular case, the DMR is basically going to be more of a supportive or defensive role, so you're probably not going to be on the front lines leading the charge when it comes down to it, but I thought I'd let you guys know that it is an extensive reload, and you're going to want to try to play a little bit more conservative and try not to be as aggressive as maybe using something of the assault rifle category. So jumping right into the recoil numbers, you guys are going to notice that there is a 2.1 times first shot recoil. Now, considering that the DMR category has all of its weapons in single fire, you're going to constantly be hitting the maximum recoil when it comes to vertical, which would be 0.5, which is going to definitely rack that up very high. So definitely it's going to be in your best interest to try to reduce that or compensate for it by pulling down on the mouse or the analog stick, depending on what platform you're on. Now, jumping into the horizontal, you guys are going to notice on the left pull it's going to be negative 0.1, and on the right it's going to be 0.3, which is actually not terribly bad. That'll be a little bit easier to compensate for. So of course, if you're not somebody that wants to use an attachment slot to decrease that, you do have the availability to try to compensate for it using your mouse or analog stick by pulling down and to the left, and that's going to at least keep it a lot more center and not take it out of control. So overall, guys, that's pretty much the information when it comes down to the statistics of the weapons and trying to digress them, but as of course, I'll give you guys some recommendations for attachments that I do find pretty well for this particular weapon. So for my recommendations for the Ace 53 SV, I'm going to recommend going with a red dot sight or a Cobra for the particular optics, because I found with the higher optics or the ones that have a different purpose on the battlefield to not be as effective as the previous episode. But if you do have success, I highly recommend it. But in this particular case, I'm going to recommend something of more of a red dot or a Cobra sighting, considering that it found it a little bit more effective, and it allows you to be a little bit aggressive if you do happen to get in the midst of things, and in that case, the higher optics are not going to degrade your ability to kill the opposition. But by all means, try to use the weapon in a supportive role. You're going to be a lot more successful, and it's going to be a little bit easier to kill the opposition at bay. For your second accessory, I'm going to recommend going with a green laser sight or just the standard laser sight, considering that the hip fire on the DMRs is pretty atrocious, and it's going to at least make it a little bit better, but by all means, you're not going to want to be hip firing very often. But in the off chance that an enemy does pop out of a corner and you're not prepared, I do recommend going with something that's going to at least enhance your ability to kill them. In relation to the barrel attachment, I'm going to recommend going with a silencer, considering that most players pay attention to the minimap in a lot more of an active sense. So having the ability to get the jump on the newer players as well as the more advanced players is going to lead you to a lot more success at the expense of a little bit range deduction. But you're still going to be doing sufficient damage when it comes down to it, so I know that shouldn't be too big of a deal. Now, if you do find that to not be your cup of tea, I also recommend using a flash hider that has no negative side effects, and it only gives you an advantage when it comes down to muzzle flash. It decreases that and almost eliminates it in most cases. So that should make it a little bit easier to try to locate the opposition if you're not willing to take the disadvantages of a suppressor. And finally, the underbarrel attachments. In this particular case, with the weapon having a sufficient amount of first shot recoil and you're always going to be achieving that, I would highly recommend going with an angled grip to decrease that as much as possible. But of course, you always have the ability to use a stubby grip if that's not your cup of tea and if you'd rather have tighter groupings. But those are my recommendations, guys. In relation to the paint that you can equip to your weapon, I would go with probably anything that's going to be equivalent to the map you're going to be playing on, considering that you are going to have that suppressing sound. So people are going to be looking for you, but also having the ability to blend in with the environment is always a pretty good idea when it comes down to it. But anyway, guys, that has been the particular episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any recommendations for future episodes, please let me know in the comments below. And with that said and done, this is NMO, and I'm going to be signing out, guys. Peace.